Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special edition, first ever interview style casual conversation of the Furtado experience, where we have conversations around how we can live a more conscious, engaged, and fulfilling life. My guest today is Nat Couropmitree, and I apologize for that. Nat talks, he tweets, he lives about self-acceptance and vulnerability and using our own stories to get more out of life. And this is the question I'm going to start every podcast conversation with. So you're the first one, Nat. I'm really excited. Who is Nat, and what is the story of Nat?
Wow. It's a really interesting question because I spent a lot of my recent years dismantling the stories of who I am. And I mean, essentially at the core of who I am, I'm essence or awareness or consciousness, right? And the experience I've had is one of struggle, of not knowing who I was as a kid, not understanding why I was alive and what my value was. And so that drove a lot of how I lived my life, trying to discover, trying to be better, trying to be enough. And I jumped into personal development, and it served me to some extent. It got me to where I am now, but it didn't really answer the question for me of why am I here or what's my value. In personal development, it seemed to just kind of further the quest. It was like I was trying to use personal development as the thing to fix the belief I had about myself that I wasn't enough. And so obviously, because my core belief was that I wasn't enough, there was no amount of doing that was going to resolve that. And probably my my conscious spiritual journey started when I was working at a startup and I was busting my butt to do well. And I was on call. I wasn't great with boundaries. I was just doing whatever I could to look good in the eyes of the management. And, I was driven by like the desire for more money, and I literally got sick. And so up until then, I had still been reading a lot about I read like Deepak Chopra stuff, Dan Millman stuff, Celestine Prophecy, even some like channel material I was reading. But when I got sick and I found a meditation center, they introduced me to the actual experience of chi, of energy. Up to that point, it was only an intellectual understanding, but to actually experience it opened me up to newer experiences, and that probably led deeper to how I became a coach, understanding that our thoughts affect our energy, and our health must mean that it affects how we show up in life and how we experience life. And those were some of the steps that led to me becoming a coach. And then even as a coach, my experience evolved from one of this is who I think I can be as a coach. I have to follow the bandwagon because it seems more traditional and acceptable, and who I am has never felt acceptable or traditional. I've always felt like an outsider. So that was the journey of life coaches, is coming into deeper acceptance of who I am. Recognizing that I have value as I am, even though it looks different from everyone else or a lot of other people. And I mentioned self-acceptance, but it's really about like feeling at home in my own body in this world.
Right, which can be so incredibly challenging as you kind of touched on it with all these external pressures of what you're talking about most recently. What does being a life coach look like? What does being successful in the startup world look like? What does, going back to all the way to your childhood, what does a successful child look like? I think there's always so much external pressures that are weighing down on ourselves, and we get so bogged down in them. I want to kind of take a step back and look at before you started going down the spiritual journey of the inner knowing. I'm curious, what specific pressures made you feel like you weren't enough?
It's a great question. I don't know the initial origin of what led me to feel not enough. It could be just that I felt alone, that maybe that I didn't think people understood me, or my parents didn't understand me, or, it just felt really different. And then I think once that thought took hold, then I was on this path of trying to discover how I could feel more as part of the whole. But my journey that led down that path was really to abandon myself, to sacrifice or compromise or contort myself to fit into the acceptable boxes that other people created.
Right. I mean, I think there's so much power into that, and I'd love to unpack that. Of how did you recognize that, and how did you start going within in this inner knowing? And maybe it starts with this the chi energy, or how did you kind of explore some of this? Like, it's okay if I don't fit into this box, because if we think about it, I feel like most people don't actually fit in the box. They put themselves in the box because of these external pressures. And I'm curious what your experience was.
Yeah, it's like the square peg in the round hole sort of thing. It's like, right. I like cut off edges or suppressed parts of myself to try to fit in. It wasn't a good fit, but it was. Yeah. Right. Ask your question again, Justin.
Yeah. I'm curious how your experience of not being enough and wanting to fit yourself into a box eventually transferred your energy from that to the inner knowing to where you are now.
I think ultimately it came from this awareness that what I was doing wasn't working. That all the energy, all the seeking, all the trying to change who I was only exhausted me. And no matter how much I achieved, how much money I accumulated, how much, external accolades I achieved, I still felt dissatisfied. I still felt not enough. It was just like, I can't do this anymore. I give up.
But you said something at the beginning that was interesting. You said you finally had the awareness that this isn't working for me. But before, you're kind of going and flowing into not so much of awareness, but like perception from the outside world that these external factors are going to lead to my awareness eventually. And I'm curious, was there a moment that you just started listening to that inner feeling, or was it kind of, it was probably gradual, but I'm curious for those that are starting, that are listening and they have some of this awareness, this inner knowing, but they haven't quite developed it yet, but they're hearing something. I'm curious what your thoughts are for them, and sharing your experience of how you started to really accept that awareness?
It was gradual, definitely gradual. There were moments of incredible clarity, insight, and then like the next moment or the next day or of like cloudiness again. And I think part of that is just the learned self, the conditioning that, these are the ways that I've learned to stay safe. And so when I might have that insight or clarity, it's like, oh, wow, this is like really cool. And then like you just, whatever the safety mechanism comes up and clouds over it. And so, and then you buy into the old story again. Oh, I'm not enough, like blah, blah, blah. So, so it's gradual, some moments of great clarity, some moments of great confusion. And I think that once you have that opening, though, like, not that you keep seeking it, because seeking it also creates more cloudiness. But you know that it exists. You know that there's this other space that operates differently from the space, from all the conditioning that we receive. And the more we tune into it in the moment, the more that we acknowledge it, the more we spend time in it as it emerges. Like we allow its presence, we allow its expression, and it becomes, eventually it can become more dominant than the conditioning.
Right. And I think there's some value in there to talk about how do we create this space for inner knowing and inner wisdom, especially when we get in these rabbit holes of chasing all these external accolades and perception from the outside world. How do we create that inner wisdom and that inner space and make time for that?
Yeah. I think the first thing is to recognize that you are it. Like, you are the wisdom and you are the knowing. And it's not like you're not this human that's like accessing the inner knowing, right? It's a switching of identities. You're the knowing, and then this human thing is a outpicturing of that, a temporary body, a temporary suit or costume, right? So that would probably be the first step, if you can call it a step, just an acknowledgement and awareness of like this is what I am, and then creating the space for it or acknowledging it can be different for each person. Some people thrive on rituals, and they have some sort of sacred practice that they engage in. Some people get it from a regular meditation practice. And meditation can look like in many different ways. It could be sitting and breathing. It could be walking. It could be dancing, or martial arts could be a form of meditation, if done, with awareness. So all of these are ways. Paying attention to what we're feeling, our emotions, having awareness of our emotions instead of doing what our society and culture promotes, which is suppress them, ignore them. That's a bad move. So, but even if you do it, you'll find out later. So it'll circle back around and it'll wake you up. And being in nature, being in awe, being in wonder, being around babies, I think it's a great way to bring yourself to presence and creating that space. I guess what I'm pointing to is like the space within will find you. It's not like we have to create it, although we can. If you're drawn to it, if you're feeling a calling for it, then that space is already letting you know that it exists, that it is you. And it's a matter of just continuing to pay attention. I didn't share such concrete stuff. I mean, there's so much. Because the thing that I shy away from is telling people that, like, there's only one way or this is the way. The way that worked for me is I did a lot of like energy work, Tai Chi, Qigong. That worked for me. Things that engaged my body worked for me. Just because when I was a kid, I used to escape my body to avoid being present to pain. And so one of my paths of awareness has been being in my body and being present in my body. I also learned to meditate since I was a little kid. I grew up in a Buddhist family, and so my dad taught me that. And so I had it in me, but I didn't understand the benefit of meditation quite as clearly as I do now. Like, I understood it as like, this is something that can calm me down or center me, but I didn't understand the true spiritual perspective of meditation as a kid. And yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, it's beautiful. I think a lot of what you kind of suggested is, yes, it is a journey for every other individual, every other listener or viewer of this podcast, this experience. It's going to look different for them. But I do believe there are everything that you talked about, whether it was meditating or energy work or yoga, anything, it all had to do with presence and being present. And it can be challenging when the thinking mind is always running. And I find that, honestly, the more I spend time on the internet, the more my thinking mind kind of runs, and the more I just like spend time in the in the physical world, the less my thinking mind thinks. And in a world where many of the listeners might be working from home and are on the internet a lot, I'm curious, and I know you use the power of the internet as well, how you invite this space of presence outside of this digital communication and conversation.
Yeah, it's a great question. I do notice that for myself as well. The addictive, the addiction of social media and being online and engaging, like, it gives you the right cocktails of chemicals that just, feel good, and it can make you lose presence and focus. And the more that I'm off it or have chunks of time where I'm not connected, I feel so much better. But definitely setting boundaries is helpful. Deciding how much time you're going to be on the internet. And I think the other thing, though, is if you are on the internet, to take time to connect to yourself first. Take time to like center, ground, and then when engaging, like engage from your center rather than engaging just from your head, your mind, because all of that, like, energy, they say that energy goes where you focus, and if you're mainly up here, then first of all, energy is not circling well throughout your body. It's just more spinning up here. And that's going to cause you to be more distracted. Obviously, you're not going to be able to focus as well, but it has other impact. Like you may not be able to sleep as well because all the energy is up here and not further down. And it can cause other health issues as well. So the more that you can, like, my suggestion is like, okay, before you go online, connect to your feet or connect to your like lower abdomen, the second chakra, and really feel grounded and centered there. And then do what you need to do on the computer. And then the second thing I would recommend is less switching from, like, focus on one activity. If you're on your computer, focus being on the computer and doing that. Switch less from one tab to the next tab, or from, if you're watching TV, don't pick up your phone to look up something. Like, all of that switching back and forth causes energy to go back and forth as well. And then you feel that in your mind.
Could you expand more on the energy that kind of shifts back and forth, and how energy shows up in our daily lives?
Yeah. I think again, it goes back to energy flows where your attention goes. There's that saying out there. And so, like, if you were to put your hand out and focus on your palm, you might, if you're sensitive to energy, you might start to feel tingling in your palm, right? Like, I can feel tingling in the palm here as I focus there. And so a lot of us maybe aren't as attuned to energy, but we all are. Like, we can walk into a room, and if there's been an argument, we feel something. We know something feels off. There's tension. It's thick. If someone is emotional, we can feel that. If you're in the car on the highway and someone's staring at you, you look because you can feel that. So we're more in tune than we think. And so if we think then about where attention goes day to day, right? So if you tell yourself, I have so much to do and so little time, your mind's going to freak out, right? You're going to be overwhelmed. And because you're telling yourself that I have so much to do, which means, like, it's undefined, there's so much, it's just kind of scattered, and then so little time, which means you feel constriction in your body and energy doesn't flow. And so that causes more scattered and more overwhelmed because the energy is not flowing well. So then if you bring it back to, like, a day-to-day thing of, like, oh, well, I'm doing this, and multitasking, it's not really a great thing, especially if someone that's more sensitive to energy or more empathic is, you're shifting from one thing to the next thing, and so your energy, your focus keeps on going back and forth, back and forth. Same with, like, oh, let's see what's new. Let me see what the new notifications are on Twitter or, whatever social media. Again, it's a low grade addiction. Maybe not so low grade. I don't know. And I'm guilty of it too. Like, it's not like I'm like a saint around that, but I'm definitely conscious of, like, oh, okay, I'm checking this too much. I'm starting to feel off. I need to go do something else to bring myself back present. And that might be taking a walk. That might actually be taking a nap. That might be doing Qigong or something like that. Something that, or even just laughing. Laughing for the heck of it helps move energy and bring me present.
And as I was preparing for this, I was going through, and some of it, part of year, I feel like your mantra is play, then make impactful work, versus I think the dominant culture is let's make impactful work and then play. I'm curious if you could expand more upon that in terms of a perspective of how energy and how that playful energy actually brings a sense of more joy to your work, but also probably doing more better quality work, because I know I've noticed this for myself.
Yeah. Playful energy. I mean, if you think about our pets or little kids, they're so full of energy. They're so creative. And they're so present, right? And I think that's what playfulness is all of that. It's flowing energy. Like when you're playful, when you're playing anything, you're not thinking. You're just not thinking. You're just completely in the moment. And there's just so much of that joy that is usually existent when you're playing, right? And that joy is an uplifting, lighter energy. And so when we bring that to work, it's like we bring that lighter energy of like, this doesn't have to be serious, right? When we make it serious, in our minds we create consequences of like, well, if I don't do this, then these things are going to go wrong, and that adds to the seriousness of it, and then that adds to the stress that we feel in our body. All, by the way, created by thought, right? It's not actually existing. It's just we're projecting. And so, yeah, you might achieve the goal, but along the way it sucked. Right? The experience totally sucked. And then you achieve the goal, and it's really only a fleeting celebration. If that. Yeah. So I was actually going to do a racket about this, similar. So my wife and I dance tango, and I'll share it briefly here. When I first started dancing the tango, I would see other more advanced dancers, and I'm like, oh, wow, that's cool. I want to be able to dance like that. And I have a picture in my mind of what good dancing is. But as I progressed, my teacher kept on telling me, hey, you got to dance with your partner. I'm like, wait, what do you mean? I'm dancing with her. And she's like, no, you're not really with her. You're not present with her. You're just doing the steps. And sometimes I would even, and it would just be such a split second of a thing of like contorting my body to fit the picture of how I thought the step should be, versus listening to my body and moving in the way that my body wanted to move. And I relate this to life and business and entrepreneurship, where so often we are trying to create the out-picturing of what success should look like. You know, whatever the metrics are, whatever that is, we're trying to do that, and we forget about our experience along the way, right? We're so quick to try to contort ourselves to fit the picture that if we knew that if we just listened to our bodies a little bit more, or a lot more, and followed our natural instinct or our natural flow, we could actually have so much of a better experience, you know, enjoying the journey, enjoying the moments. So then, whether you reach the goal or not, it's not that such big of a deal. Like, you're going to reach the goal, whatever that goal is. Or maybe it will change, who knows. But at least you're enjoying the learning, the growing, the doing, the being, all along the way. Otherwise, from what I've learned in my journey, it's not a waste, but it's you miss out on so much richness that's available in life right now, trying to hope that you'll get it later, and more often than not, you don't.
Absolutely. This is honestly what you just talked about is probably one of the biggest things I've had challenges as someone who finds themselves, driven and wanting to, kind of accomplish a lot. I'm like, okay, I'm going to have this outcome. This is my goal. And when I reach this goal, I'm going to feel great. But until then, I'm going to put my head down and do nothing fun until I reach that goal. Like I was, and my partner, my girlfriend, honestly has been that perfect balance to remind me about play and about fun. And I've had some mentors and supervisors who are like, you got to celebrate through the process a little bit. Cause I'd be like, reach the goal, next thing. And it's just like always wanting more. And it's like now, part of what I've been working recently with my coach is life is just a process. Like every day I just want to, work towards, like I have goals still, but it is about so much more of listening to where, number one, where the universe wants me to serve. And that's a whole nother conversation. But in what you just talked about, it's about enjoying the day, enjoying the work. And I think that's why I love coaching kids so much and working with kids so much, is because as irritating and frustrating as they can be sometimes because they just refuse to listen, they are incredibly present. And as adults, we lose that way, that sense of child and that sense of play. And it's fun to be a goofball, honestly. Like it is just so fun to be silly. And it's just like, I don't know where, once you turn 18 years old, you can't be silly anymore, or 21 or whatever it is, unless you have alcohol in you. And I kind of feel like this is a little bit of society and culture because, I'm thinking, I just heard a podcast this morning regarding education. So outcome based. It doesn't matter what your learning process is. As long as you get an A, you get into college, you get A's, you get into grad school, you get a good job. There's always these outcomes at the end, and people, I including myself, struggle with, what I'm going to work hard for this next thing and this next thing, and then what's next?
Yeah. Yeah, and we saw that in this past year of the pandemic. And really any time that we go through some sort of financial crisis, right, where people lose their jobs and then they lose their sense of identity and meaning for life because they've attached their meaning making with their role. And then when that's gone, they're a little lost. And it's natural, it's normal, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just an invitation to prioritize something else, something that is more available and not so circumstance-based.
Yeah, more available, prioritizing just living and being. And I want to talk about being boldly alive because you've been talking about that recently. And I'm curious what being boldly alive means to you.
Yeah. So Bold Aliveness is the name of my company. And it really speaks to a lot of what we've been talking about today, which is how can we be more ourselves, not just what society is asking of us or what society thinks is acceptable. Like, can we be adults and be playful and silly and goofy, right? If that's part of your nature. And a lot of us have been conditioned and trained that only some part of ourselves is acceptable. And so we learn to only show that part of ourselves. And we even confuse that part of ourselves is the only part that is valuable. Especially in the business world, right? We equate production, creation with value. And if you're producing, if you're creating, if you're serving, then you're valuable, right? But what about the silliness? What about the joy? What about peace? Being centered, grounded, being aware? Those are all equally valuable. And so Boldly Alive is really about bringing online those other expressions of ourselves that we've disowned. And it's not even just like the joy, the wonder. It could be like trust in ourselves. It could be owning our power and authority. Because sometimes, like me, I've as a kid experienced models of authority and power that I didn't like, and I made a decision that I didn't want to any part of that, not knowing that there are different expressions of power, and there are healthy expressions of power and authority that I could embrace. And so the aliveness speaks to consciousness. It speaks to awareness. It is what we are. It is life itself. And so, like, how does life want to express through you? Right? You say, like, how can I serve life? How can I be a conduit for life? And again, it speaks to how society wants us to only express in a very narrow way. But we have a full spectrum of expression. And the more that we allow that fuller expression, honestly, that's the path for satisfaction, or the path of satisfaction. It's really not about the achievements and the relationships. I mean, all that is great. It's all part of what we believe is meaningful, or what we make as meaningful in our lives. But what I've come to discover is the reason most of us don't feel fulfilled is not because of the stuff. It's because we're not allowing ourselves to be fully expressed.
Yeah, that full expression of self and of being literally an alive and conscious human. And I'm kind of curious what your thought is on, do you believe that one of the reasons that we don't focus more energy on being conscious and alive and expressing our true selves is because it's immeasurable? There are no numbers that can measure it. But when you talk about creativity and money, you can measure the bank account, your likes on social media, your car, all these external things. Those are the measurables. But when you kind of get down to it, everything that really matters and brings fulfillment isn't really measurable. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. If you think that's true, a little bit of true, and
I think the parts that are not measurable per se fuel what is measurable. So we think that life is about the measurable. And sure, through history, we've learned to value the hard sciences more than the soft sciences. We fund the sports and maybe not the sports, but we're more likely to fund education than we are to fund the arts, right? So, I mean, this has been going on for years. Even in like in the act of colonization, the civilized English people come to the U.S. and they take over the indigenous, the people that seemed less civilized, less smart, because they didn't have the advancements in technology, but they were living in tune with nature and themselves, right? It started a long time ago, and we're kind of like bringing up the feminine, the soft sciences. So the two go hand in hand. I think part of the reason why so much of society, of civilization, is unhappy or, not in their well-being is because they're not living in balance with themselves, where they're prioritizing the hard stuff, the measurable, the tangible stuff, and not so much the soft side, or vice versa. Some people live in their feminine too much and need more structure and assertive energy in their lives. The more that we can live in balance with ourselves, I believe is like the key to satisfaction and flourishing.
Yeah, as I heard you talk, especially at the beginning, you talked about how kind of the divine within influences the measurables, the structure. Because when I first started creating, I know I talked to you about this before, I was doing a podcast, but I was so worried about the numbers, I stopped. And it was work for me. It was pressure. I put so much pressure on myself to succeed and get to a number so I could get a sponsorship and I could get paid. And I've done this with a couple of different ventures of a community that I built. And I was like, there have to be people in there so I can make money so I don't have to, so I can escape the 9 to 5. And just forcing myself to meet the measurables. And I worked with my coach, and we talk a lot about the divine within, the feminine within. And now I'm here, and I still care about structure and measurable and goals. Those kind of help me learn as I go. But I'm working from a place within, and that's what I think that's why I naturally am attracted to the content that you are creating, and we've had some great engaging conversations. I'm curious. This is going back to our beginning conversation. There is probably someone that might be listening might have a stigma around the word, the feminine within, and I'm curious if you can unpack that a little bit.
There's many terms for the feminine within. I mean, first of all, this is not about gender. This is about a consciousness and awareness that we all have, and there are feminine qualities and there are masculine qualities. But you can easily swap it out for yin and yang. Same. Yang, same as masculine, yin, same as feminine. And, but feminine, I try not to talk too much about it because it can get confusing for people, because it's so easy to equate feminine with feminine gender. But I mean, even in relationships, like same-sex relationships, you'll see that someone, acts, even though they're like, let's say two males, one is going to be, a little bit more of a, I don't even know what the words are to use here, but they act differently in the relationship. I'm not saying that one is any weaker than the other or one is any more stronger than the other, but they kind of take on the roles of, like, someone might present more masculine and the other person might present more feminine. And the same in a female-female relationship, or any other genders out there. I mean, especially in today's world where gender is so fluid, it shows the fluidity of the masculine and feminine in us, right? Yeah. I feel like I don't know what else to say here.
Yeah, no, so in regarding to that, So growing up, I've just been always a very sensitive person, like in touch with my emotions is kind of more so, I guess, what I would say, going through childhood, high school. And I tried to suppress that, right? Because as a man, you equate this divine within, the feminine within as a negative, because that's what society says. And that's something I even struggle with during college as well. I'd be binge drinking. I'd be like, oh, I'm this, I was in a fraternity. So it's like, I'm this frat dude. I'm crazy. I'm hard, something, something along those lines. And I actually, as I've been working with my coach, and honestly, so one of the things that really awakened me was, I started dating my girlfriend who is physically stronger than me. She's an athlete. And so honestly, she might have more, quote unquote, kind of the masculine energy, the like kind of, I don't know, go get it, tiger, lion energy. And I'm probably have more of the feminine energy. And for, that actually kind of threw me for a twist for the first 6 months. And I was, not necessarily depressed, but confused. We talked about confusion last time me and you conversed. And I think it actually ended up opening up a lot more doors to self-acceptance about me. And for those that are listening, like, it's okay. It doesn't matter what your gender is and what sort of energy that is you, and that is okay. I think that's where it really matters, is being okay with being you, the essence within, instead of trying to create some other experience that will fit some box or narrative that you believe you should fit into.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. I'm similar to you. I grew up very sensitive, very emotional. I was really in touch with that. And then that threw me for a loop in my identity and self-worth growing up, because, in the 70s, 80s, I know you weren't born yet, it was very much the like a stereotype of what a man is and what a woman is, and I had very womanly qualities in terms of those aspects, and I'm sure that led to me feeling like I didn't fit in. I mean, sure, I played sports and stuff, but I was just very sensitive, and my wife, she, as a dancer, creativity, the like fashion, that sort of thing, that's very feminine for her. But as a business owner, she puts on the masculine, not puts it on, but she accesses the masculine to run a business, to take charge, to do what's necessary, so she can flip back and forth as necessary. Although for her, growing up in Ukraine, where things were tough and kind of the culture is take charge anyway, it is sometimes harder for her to, if she spent days in her masculine, to be able to feel like she can let go and allow in the feminine.
Right. It's this balance, right? Because, you're a coach, you have your own business as well. I'm sure sometimes you have to embody that masculine energy, but then sometimes you have to, take the armor off and just be vulnerable. Yeah. And just be you and be one. So I think that balance of energy is a good place to be just as a human.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this conversation, Nat, I'm curious if there's anything, you'd like, say that this listener right now is Nat before you started, like, in this personal journey of trying to transform themselves and look for all these things, but knowing that they know the answer is within. What advice or what explorations do you have for them?
Yeah. Knowing that the answer is within doesn't always mean that you don't access external help. So sometimes the answer that's within is engaging in a program, or signing up with a coach, or going to see a therapist, or like knowing that you're the knowing's going to bring to you what you need at any given moment. And just listening to that is great. And you can't mess it up. So you can do something, you think this is the right thing, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It doesn't really matter. You're here for the experience of it. And it's like the universe as you knows to serve up the next thing, and then you can choose. And sometimes you take the scenic route, sometimes you take the direct route, and it's all good. Yeah,
it's all good. There's no right or wrong experience. It's all an experience, and it's all our own. And in embodying that, I think that's an incredible place to leave off. Where can people find some of your content and your business?
Yeah, so they can find me online, my website, boldaliveness.com. And then there on the About page, you can find links to social media as well. But I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Racket.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time today, Nat. I loved our conversation, and I always love conversing with you, whether it's just going back and forth on Twitter and even more in the digital world of Zoom or Riverside FM.
Yeah, Justin, this has really been a joy. Thank you.